In 1963, Birmingham, Alabama was a heartland for the civil rights movement. It was also a battleground for the violence of racial segregation. On September 15th of that same year, 4 black girls met an untimely death when a bomb went off in their Sunday school church. The years since then have brought a 1977 conviction of Klansman Robert Dynamite Bob Chambliss, several failed attempts to reopen the investigation, and a 1983 seminal article written in the New York Times Magazine. The article, written by Howell Raines, piqued the interest of then-novice filmmaker Spike Lee. But it wouldn't be for another 15 years before the film would actually be made. Here is a look at the trailer from Spike Lee's new documentary, 4 Little Girls. In a fortuitous turn of events, the FBI announced last week that they were reopening the case. Joining me now to discuss the Birmingham bombing, past and present, filmmaker Spike Lee, and Howell Raines, New York Times journalist and native of Birmingham. I am pleased to have both of them. Here is the Birmingham bombing, the Howell Raines story that Spike read and put into his brain at that time, something that he might want to do about. 20 years later, the case that won't close. This was written July 24th, 1983. Where are we today with respect to reopening the case and the likelihood they'll turn up accomplices of Mr. Chambliss, who died in prison in, what, 80-something?
This case has such a complicated and long history, I think it's impossible to predict what might happen now. But what we do know is what the FBI has said, that they are looking at the same group of people that they were looking at the time of the Chambliss prosecution. They say they have new information. They've released no details. That's understandable. One of the 3 principal listed suspects, I emphasize they're suspects, no charges have ever been brought against these 3 people, was interviewed within the last few days in Texas, a man named Bobby Frank Cherry, now 69 years old. There are 2 other men listed in the FBI records as suspects, Herman Frank Cash and Thomas Blanton, Jr. It's not known to me at this moment whether they have re-interviewed them, but that's where they're looking.
Okay. It is fair to say, and I think I've even read this, that they would not have reopened unless they thought they had something, because they don't want to be embarrassed.
I think that's true, Charlie, but Bill Baxley, the Attorney General in Alabama, who's in Spike's film and is one of the heroes, I mean, Bob Chambliss would not have gone to prison if Bill Baxley hadn't reopened this case in the mid-'70s at great political risk. Told me the other day that he's worried because there's so many dead ends on this case that look promising. He was saying that he hopes that they are reviewing his prosecution to see what's already been looked at and dispensed with. We don't know at this moment exactly what the status there is.
Okay, let me go all the way back. Tell me about reading this and what's happened the intervening years for you, and why now, at this time, you come forward with this documentary.
Well, I graduated from NYU Film School, 3-year program. I finished 82. Well, I read the article, and I had heard about it from my parents, but I was deeply moved by it, reading Howell's in-depth article, and looked in the phone book and found Chris McNair in Birmingham, Alabama, and wrote him a letter on a whim saying, will you give me permission to make a narrative film, a dramatic film about your daughter Denise? Of course, he didn't answer it because, you know, he didn't know me from Adam, and this was another 3 years before. She's got to have it. So what's really happened is that everything is timing, and in the course of a decade and doing 10 films, gained some expertise, you know, in filmmaking. So this rolled around, and this was the right time to do it.
And how did you go about doing it?
Well, I had the ideal. I knew I wanted to do it, and so it was just a matter of who's going to pay for it. And I just called up Sheila Nevin at HBO. She runs the documentary branch at HBO, and I pitched the story. I said, fine, let's go. How much it's going to cost? I told her it. Of course, we went over budget. But they, you know, they weren't kicking and screaming, and Just got the film made just like that. So we started shooting last August, Charlie.
Yeah. And did you get most everybody that you wanted to cooperate with the film?
We wanted to interview Blanton, but he wouldn't get in front of the camera. And there were more people of the Adam A. Collins family we liked to get, but we really couldn't find them.
And you hope people come away from this film beyond the tragedy with what, a momentum to stimulating people to double up the efforts to find whether they were accomplices?
No, not at all. We did this film because I wanted the audience to really come to know the 4 girls who are no longer here.
A personal story.
Personal story. We wanted, when people, after seeing this film, we want them to know these 4 girls whose lives were cut short.
Okay, here are 2 of the people that you will meet. Take a look. This is from the film.
When my daughter, Denise, was about 6 years old, and I've always despised going shopping with my wife because my patience doesn't hold for go shopping, you know. But at any rate, this was Christmas, and we were shopping, and we had come to a store, in fact, it was Presses, going in there to buy some ribbons. And when we got into Presses, Denise said she had to go to the restroom, so we went downstairs where the restroom were, black and white again, black and colored, I beg your pardon, white and colored. And so when we got down there, the lunch counter was also in there, and you could smell the onion, the hamburgers, and Denise said she wanted a sandwich.
And it was kind of painful to say, no, you can't have it. She wanted to know why. And we had to tell her the sage-old story about whites only can eat here, but we can't. We'll eat when we get home. She didn't understand that so hard.
That was the night that I made up my mind that I guess I had to tell her that she couldn't have that sandwich because she was black.
I guess for men it's worse than it is for women because they are more sensitive, or I guess that's what you might call it. They hate to say, well, my child can't do what everybody else's child can do, and it makes me mad that I can't do anything about it. I can't change it right now.
Well, I want you to know that night couldn't have been any more painful than seeing her laying up there with a rock smashed in her head than to tell her that I couldn't buy her that sandwich down there because she was black. And I'm not sure she ever understood that.
What happens in this film is you come to know the people that died and the people that survived them, which is a powerful statement. It also helps you appreciate it, and Howell helped me understand this, how this was different than just one more terrible act of violence in the Civil Rights Revolution.
As Dr. King said, and as Andy Young says in the film, Birmingham was the place where segregation ended. And this event was the event that not only was pivotal along with the demonstrations that preceded the church bombing in changing segregation, but I think this was the event that changed Birmingham internally. Birmingham was never the same. The white resistance to segregation was never the same. And to see the images in Spike's film, Fred Shuttlesworth being beaten in the street, to see the McNairs, whom I've known now for over 20 years, reminds me of the world that existed prior to September 15th, 1963. It's literally disappeared. That's one of the reasons that I have been obsessed, I guess is maybe only slightly too strong a word, with this story for over 20 years. And one of the reasons this film moved me so much, because this world no longer exists. And that's part of what this event is about. It's about many other things.
Like many other things, including?
Well, it's about human loss, tremendous loss. It's one of the things.
I would say courage also. I think that, for me, that was one of the most amazing things in making this film, is interviewing the parents and relatives and knowing the loss they suffered 34 years, but the courage they've had to go on and keep living, and still knowing every night they go to bed with this nightmare of knowing that their child had been murdered. and being a young parent myself, it really put it into context. And my wife Ty and I have both said that we know what we would do if anything happened to our two children. So you know, I just have nothing but love for all the parents and relatives, because you know, it's courageous what they've been able to do and get through it without hate. That's another thing.
How about you? Did you get through it?
Oh, I mean, Charles, I think that if they got through it without hate, how could I hate anybody? So, I mean, in reading some reviews, they were like, of this film, Spike's not angry.
Yeah,
I mean,
another one said Spike has mellowed.
It's ridiculous. First of all, forget about me. Just look what's. This film was not about me. You know, it's a documentary, and we just turn the camera on and let these people speak and tell their stories.
How do you like making documentaries?
Oh, I love it. I love it. I mean, I've always wanted to do it, but beyond that, Charlie, I'm a filmmaker, so whether it's a documentary, feature film, commercials, music videos, you know, I love all the different mediums.
Tell me about the encounter with Governor Wallace.
Well, we wrote the governor, and his office said fine. I think one of the reasons why they agreed to interview, because they're trying to do this revisionist history act with him, because, you know, I don't think the governor's going to be with this that much longer, so they want to try to change his place in history. So they saw it as an opportunity to do this, and we got there. It was like 100 press people. They were really trying to make this into a media event. They wanted a photo op. They wanted me to take pictures with the former governor, you know, and I squashed all that stuff. And so we just, as you know, he's deaf, so we printed out the questions so he could read them. And then we just turned the camera on, and he just took over. And he just pulled Ed, his assistant, his black assistant, from the side twice. You know, that was not any trickery we did with the filmmaking. And he's really kind of pathetic.
What do you think of Governor Wallace today?
Well, no one can fail to have human sympathy for the terrible agony that he's gone through since he was shot. He said that he knows what it is to suffer. There was a thorn put in his flesh. But as someone who was watching television the day that he made that speech that's in this film, I have to say that I can't forget how much of this he created, he bears responsibility for by creating an environment that was conducive to it. John Young, one of the prosecutors in this case, said in the Birmingham News the other day, he said, I don't want anyone to forget George Wallace was responsible for the events, the climate that made this happen. And you have to understand, this church bombing followed a summer of provocations. Wallace sending the highway patrol into Birmingham at the time of the demonstrations in May and June. Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door in midsummer, spouting defiance at the Supreme Court or the federal courts and the federal government. Wallace going into Tuskegee and superseding a local superintendent who was peaceably abiding with desegregation orders. Then this cataclysmic event, the unspeakable event on September 15th. And of course, George Wallace denounced it. But
even put up a
reward.
Right?
One of the things we now know was that his public service director helped disrupt the investigation. But Wallace was the state of Alabama in those days. His power was as close to absolute as it gets in a democratic situation. And the Reverend Joseph Lowry, SCLC, told me of a conversation he had with Wallace one time in the governor's office. Wallace was meeting with Dr. King and some others. And Reverend Lowry said, he turned to Wallace and said, I want to speak to you not as a civil rights leader and a member of SCLC, and you not as a governor, but I want to speak to you as a Methodist minister to a Methodist layman. And I want you to think about the fact that God is watching what's happening in Alabama, and he'll hold you accountable. Well, I'm not a theologian, and I wouldn't go as far as Joseph Lowry about who's accountable for what, but there was a core of truth there that can't be denied.
What did Wallace say to that, did he think? When Lowry put it to him?
As I recall, Larry told me Wallace said that he would think seriously about that. I mean, he's a courtly man. But there's no question that what Lowry said was that when you shout defiance, the man in the street who's prone to violence takes it as an excuse to pick up a club or a stick of dynamite.
Especially if it's the highest authority in the state.
Yeah.
Why do you think Chambliss denied guilt to the end?
Code of honor, maybe a Klan oath, I don't know, but what I find troubling is that they know who did it. I mean, a couple days after the bomb went off, I think everybody knew who did it, and
some of the names that he mentioned.
Yes, all those guys, and Jacob Hoover knew that too, and they did a lot to thwart, you know, the case. So I mean, supposedly it's a different FBI. You know, the day we live in, so...
Well, one thing I want to be careful, Spike. We know in court of law, one person's been convicted. We need to be very careful here for legal reasons. But one of the things that I'm proudest of, the thing I am proudest of in that article, Charlie, is I showed through FBI documents there that had never been disclosed before, that in 1965, J. Edgar Hoover personally overruled the FBI agents in Birmingham who wanted to make a case in court, take Chambliss to trial, and Hoover refused them permission to give their evidence to the U.S. attorney. So Spike is right that the same body of information that is extant today was known, fully known between 1963 and 65. Hoover blocked the prosecution, presumably, this is my presumption, because I think he didn't want to do anything that would help the civil rights movement or reflect favorably on Dr. King.
Who he hated.
Who he hated. Sure. That's a historical fact.
Why do you think Chambliss never talked?
I visited Chambliss twice in prison, and as I told Spike in his film, he is was the most pathological racist that I've ever known. He was sworn into the Ku Klux Klan in a public ceremony in a Birmingham park in the 1920s, the Robert E. Lee Clavern of the Ku Klux Klan. And I believe that he, unlike many other members of the Klan leaders, took absolutely seriously the oath never to betray any Klan secret or Klan member, and he was willing to die for it. And the reason I visited him twice was that I said to him, you will die in prison unless you tell what you know. And I'm here to tell you, I'm a journalist, I'm here for the reason I want to write a story. If you will tell me what you know, it'll be published and things will then proceed. And I think you would have a good chance of using your knowledge to alleviate your situation. And he was delusional to this degree. He thought that George Wallace, who was now being elected in the late 70s on black votes, he thought George Wallace was going to pardon him. And there was no chance of that happening. But at bottom, he simply couldn't bring himself to turn on fellow Klansmen, in my view. I think Spike's initial comment was right on the money.
And he never acknowledged anything. He was always, I didn't do it, and therefore I can't talk about it.
No, not that. Yes, he always said that, but he also described in great detail, I think this is in the film too.
Yes.
He said, I know who planted the bomb, and he named people, and he told in great detail what happened, where it was put, how they got away, and I realized at some point in the narrative, he was telling me exactly what had in fact happened, the story of that night, but substituting other characters for himself and the real participants.
Was the bomb thrown or was it planted?
No, it was planted beside the building.
Entrance?
Beside you remember,
the side
there's
entrance?
a side entrance where the children were just inside the wall. And by the counts that the FBI has, the person carrying the box with the dynamite was let out a block away, came down the alley, came down the side of the church, set it against the wall outside the Sunday school room, walked around to the front of the church, and by that time, the people who dropped him off had come around and picked him up. And it was at that point of the pickup, car door opens, the light comes on, that Mrs. Curtis Glenn from Detroit, visiting the city, looks in the window and looks Bob Chambliss in the face. And it was that first-hand ID that put Chambliss in the position of being the only one who ever went to prison.
And what was his sentence?
Life.
And he died in 80-something.
Died in 85.
Heart disease?
Did
or what was
David
it?
Van ever testify that he saw Chambliss stand on the corner like the firebug?
No, that's Mayor David Van of Birmingham.
Which he said in the film.
Yeah, a memorable quote. He saw Chambliss standing there, like looking at the church like a firebug watching his fire. But he was not called I'm sure he would have been willing to. I don't know why they didn't put him on the stand.
Any other unanswered questions for you other than who else was involved in this bombing?
No, I don't think that's really the main reason why we...
No, I didn't say that. I mean,
did
what
the film.
questions that you wanted to know answers to and you couldn't find? Not that this was the main reason you did this.
I wanted to know who the girls were. That was really the...
Your film was about who the victims were, not who
Right.
the...
Yeah, we're
Bombers
trying to do
were.
the Oliver Stone number. Not at all.
Yeah. Here is Chambliss right here. Birmingham today. Tell me about your town today.
It's an entirely different city. The major industry was steel and iron when I was there. Tough work, tough people. Today, the major employer is a hospital and a university, white-collar work, computers, great cancer center, great heart center, difference between a white-collar town and a blue-collar town, difference between a town with its own resources and one owned by an outside corporation that cared nothing for the community.
And the status and the state of race relations?
Race relations in Birmingham have the same tensions they have everywhere in America, but like many southern cities, it has, in my judgment, Spike may have a different view from his time there, more real integration at the political and social levels than you see in the Northeast.
Because of prior experience in living with...
I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
More contact.
More contact, yeah. Did you find any attitude when you went down to do this film? Many people saying...
Nobody even knew we were there, so... We were just there. I mean, we weren't announcing it. And one of the good things about doing a documentary film is you have to be like a detective. So a lot of the people who are in the film, I had no idea who they were, and we had to find them. You know, people would give us a tip, and we'd call them up and stuff like that. But we had a good time.
Anybody who didn't want to talk?
Oh, yeah, several people didn't want to talk. But
Why not?
It's painful. It's very painful, you know, for people to recall that stuff, and a lot of people, you know, just want to forget about it, don't want to talk about it. But we were very happy with the fact that we knew if we could get Chris McNair.
This is the gentleman we
Yes,
saw talking
Denise
about his daughter
McNair's,
wanting to
yes.
eat the sandwich.
If we got him, everybody else would fall in line. He's such a well-respected politician.
So he
down
has
there.
that much influence in terms
Yes. What's his position?
He was a state representative, and now he is on the county commission in Birmingham. And I must say that, to me, as someone who's lived with the story quite a while, seeing Chris and Maxine McNair and Alpha Robertson, and who I know well and personally for a long time, and the other family members of the other families who I don't know personally, but seeing them in this setting, to me was, to use a word I think it's best to be cautious with, redemptive in a way. I mean, to see their family sacrifice recognized was moving to me.
The film is playing as we speak at the Film Forum
Yes. Lower Manhattan.
in Lower Manhattan. 4 Little Girls, an HBO production
We've seen HBO in February be broadcast.
on HBO, but
On
first it's
HBO.
got a cinematic releases.
Right, we're going to be in 9 other areas.
And playing in Birmingham?
Yes, the phone's ringing off the hook. We got to get a screening down there quick.
Congratulations,
All right, thanks
buddy.
for having us.
Great to see you. Well,
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.